Here is today's big question. Is Donald Trump's $1.776 billion plan a legal loophole to pay off his political allies and secure lifetime audit immunity for his business empire, entirely funded by the American taxpayer? The administration created the Truth and Justice Commission, which establishes a massive fund drawn directly from the U.S. Treasury to compensate victims of weaponized justice, however the White House chooses to define that. But when you look under the hood, it has zero independent oversight, no transparency requirements, and bypasses congressional funding approval entirely. But just in the last week, a federal judge dropped a massive wrench into the entire operation by agreeing to reopen the original lawsuit that spawned this deal. In the latest twist, anonymous sources claim he is considering completely dropping the entire effort due to the immense backlash. Today, we will examine the legal mechanics of how a unique lawsuit allowed the president to essentially sue himself and win. We're going to investigate the secrets behind the deal and the eye-popping fine print that grants the Trump family blanket immunity from the IRS. Finally, we're going to explain the political fallout, why this triggered an unprecedented rebellion inside the GOP and paralyzed the government's legislative agenda. Welcome back to the Exhausted Majority. Let's get into it. Before we go any further, though, let's acknowledge something that's hiding in plain sight. $1.776 billion. That's the year of the Declaration of Independence. The number was not chosen by accident. The administration has branded what critics are calling a partisan slush fund after the birth of the American democracy on the eve of the 250th celebration. Make of that what you will. Section 1. The anatomy of the deal. How to sue yourself and win. To understand how we got to a nearly $2 billion fund, we have to look at the legal pretext used to justify it. It traces back to a massive $10 billion lawsuit filed by Trump, the Trump Organization, and his eldest sons against the IRS and the Department of Treasury 6 months ago. The foundation of the lawsuit, frankly, was technically real. We have to be honest here. A former IRS contractor named Charles Littlejohn did illegally leak to the press tax returns for the president and thousands of other wealthy Americans. Littlejohn was prosecuted and found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for that crime. But rather than suing the contractor for damages, Trump chose to sue his own executive branch. Why? Well, because that's where the money is. Now, the administration's defenders will point out that settling a $10 billion lawsuit for a $1.776 billion program represents responsible compromise. It saves the Treasury over $8 billion, according to them. But there are two major problems with that logic. First, legal experts across the spectrum agree that the Department of Justice had a virtually guaranteed win. Trump filed the suit past the statute of limitations, and the government has consistently argued the IRS is not liable for crimes committed by outside contractors. In a normal world, the government walks into court, gets a dismissal, and taxpayers pay $0. Second, this lawsuit presented a massive jurisdictional and ethical paradox. You had a sitting president of the United States of America suing his own executive branch. He was simultaneously the plaintiff, the guy demanding the money, and the ultimate boss of everyone on the defense side. That isn't just a conflict of interest in disguise. This is a conflict of interest wearing a neon hat that says, "I'm a conflict of interest." Section 2. Courtroom Shenanigans and the End Run Conspiracy. Recognizing this blatant absurdity, Federal District Judge Kathleen Williams was reportedly preparing to dismiss the case entirely due to what's called Article 3 standing concerns. Now, in plain English, this means the federal court lacks the authority to hear a case when there isn't a genuine adverse conflict between the two sides. You cannot have a real legal fight with yourself on both sides of the lawsuit. To bypass this imminent judicial review, the plaintiff, Donald Trump, pulled a stunning end run with the cooperation of Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Now, let me remind you, Blanche was Trump's own personal criminal defense attorney just 2 years ago. Now, he was supposedly representing the government side in a lawsuit brought by his former client and current boss, the President of the United States of America. Now, just 48 hours before a critical court deadline, the DOJ and the president's private lawyers filed a notice of voluntary dismissal. They dropped the lawsuit outside of court, completely avoiding judicial scrutiny. In exchange, the executive branch agreed to authorize $1.776 billion of taxpayer money to a new discretionary fund controlled by commissioners answerable directly to the president. Section 3. The Judgment Fund and the Death of Oversight. Where exactly does nearly $1.8 billion magically come from without a vote from Congress? It comes from a permanent Treasury account established in 1956. It's called the Judgment Fund. Normally, if a postal truck accidentally totals your car and you successfully sue the government, the Judgment Fund is used to cut you a check quietly so Congress doesn't have to pass a special bill just to pay your legal winnings. It was built to settle legitimate legal losses. It was never intended to be a limitless financial vehicle to bypass the legislative branch and fund presidential pet priorities. Now, let's look at the structure of this new commission. First, the board it consists of 5 commissioners. 4 are directly appointed by the Attorney General, and the president can fire all 5 of them without cause if they ever defy his wishes. Let's look at oversight. There is no bipartisan requirement, there's no independent inspector general, and there's no congressional oversight. Let's take a look at secrecy. According to the rules of the commission's under absolutely no obligation to disclose its evaluation process, who receives the money, or how much they get. And the quarterly reports are designated as strictly confidential and only go to the Attorney General. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't mince words, calling it outright corruption and a $1.7 billion slush fund for the president's friends. And from an objective, constitutional perspective, she's not wrong. If an administration can simply threaten to sue itself, settle with itself, and drain billions from the Treasury, the exclusive power of the purse designated solely to Congress is effectively dead. Section 4. The Hidden Addendum. Lifetime immunity. But as shocking as a multi-billion-dollar unregulated fund is, it isn't even the biggest headline. The real kicker was deliberately buried deep in the fine print of the settlement paperwork. Tucked inside the administrative addendum is a sweeping, permanent clause that explicitly states the United States government is forever barred from examining, auditing, and prosecuting the past tax filings of Donald J. Trump, his family members, and all associated corporate subsidiaries. Let that sink in for a moment. By settling the lawsuit with himself, the president secured blanket, lifetime IRS audit immunity for his entire real estate and business empire. Independent tax experts estimate this clause instantly insulates the Trump organization from over $100 million of active, ongoing tax liabilities and structural penalties, including the high-profile dispute surrounding his Chicago skyscraper loan write-offs. It's a blatant, unauditable corporate shield paid for by the American taxpayer. Section 5. The Capitol Hill Mutiny and the Breaking Point. Unsurprisingly, this has triggered a massive rebellion inside the Republican Party, not to mention the predictable outrage from the other side of the aisle. With critical midterm elections looming, fiscal conservatives are panicking over fresh polling data. Trump's overall approval has dipped to a second-term low of 34% in the Reuters Ipsos poll, and the Silver Bulletin overall average has dipped below 40% for the first time in its second term. Meanwhile, over 72% of Americans disapprove of the administration's handling of inflation and the cost of living. Asking vulnerable Republicans to look their working-class constituents in the eye while defending a multi-billion-dollar taxpayer giveaway to January 6th rioters and presidential insiders is proving to be a political poison pill Republicans are unwilling to swallow. Right now, a coalition of over 20 Republican senators, led by establishment heavyweights like Mitch McConnell and Tom Tillis, has launched a full-blown legislative mutiny. Senator Tillis publicly condemned the deal's architecture, calling the commission stupid on stilts and brazen political patronage. Mitch McConnell issued an incredibly blunt, blistering statement. Quote, "The nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assaulted cops. Utterly stupid. Morally wrong. Take your pick." Unquote. Because of this backlash, Capitol Hill is at a complete standstill. Senate Republicans have explicitly frozen the administration's entire legislative agenda, holding a massive $70 billion immigration enforcement bill and critical Iran war funding hostage until they get ironclad written restrictions placed on this Truth and Justice Commission. Section 6. The legal reversal. The lawsuit reopens. If a rebellious Congress wasn't bad enough for President Trump, the judicial system just struck back with a vengeance. Just days ago, a group of 35 former federal judges from across the political spectrum filed a motion arguing that Trump's original lawsuit against the IRS was an entirely fraudulent, collusive scheme designed to bypass the court system, and in a dramatic legal twist, the federal judge agreed to reopen the case to formally consider dismissing the entire underlying lawsuit due to the lack of a genuine case or controversy. If the judge dismisses the original lawsuit as a sham, the entire legal house of cards collapses. The backroom settlement loses its legal foundation, potentially freezing the $1.776 billion transfer before a single dollar changes hands. Currently, the administration is facing a four-front war to stop this entire scheme. First, the federal judge is reconsidering the sham lawsuit. Second, emergency legislative freeze efforts led by Mitch McConnell and Tom Tillis. Third, parallel injunctive lawsuits filed by injured Capitol police officers. And fourth, new restrictive legislation championed by Representatives Jamie Raskin and Elizabeth Warren. Section 7. The conclusion. The verdict. So let's return to our original question. Is the Truth and Justice Commission a legitimate remedy for government overreach, or is it a taxpayer-funded tool for self-dealing and political patronage? When you bypass Congress, hijack the judgment fund, use your former defense attorney to sign off on the deal, and slip in lifetime audit immunity for your personal finances, the answer is a resounding, unequivocal yes. It is the monetization of grievance at the expense of the American public. But the checks and balances of our system are not completely dead yet. If you're tired of watching the U.S. Treasury be treated like a private, partisan piggy bank, you don't have to sit back and stay silent. You can call the Capitol switchboard right now at 202-224-3121. Again, that is 202-224-3121. Demand that your senators stand firm and support the Ban Presidential Plunder of Taxpayer Funds Act. If you have a Republican senator in your state, your voice could determine whether the scales of justice tip towards accountability or unchecked power. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this deep legal dive. If you appreciate commentary that actually reads the fine print of legal filings instead of just tweets and headlines, please do me a favor and gently tap that like button and subscribe to the channel. Please sound off in the comments below. If you think I've been unfair to the administration, tell me why. I will read and respond. In the interest of full disclosure, this script was developed with AI assistance to help synthesize deep legal research and structure the arguments, but all the facts and opinions are entirely my own and my responsibility. The mission of this channel remains unchanged. Navigating the noise of today's political circus, dodging the clowns on the left, avoiding the jokers on the right, and delivering the bald-faced truth as I see it. Stay sane, keep them honest, and never lose hope. I'll see you on the next one.